Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest, reacting to a crazy trade that happened in the NBA today. Jimmy Butler traded from the Minnesota Timberwolves to the Philadelphia 76ers, along with Justin Patton, in return for Robert Covington and Dario Saric. Ryker, the Sixers have been touted as one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference this year and have been playing. They're right at the top of the standings. They're in the top tier of Eastern Conference teams. They're now bringing in one of the best shooting guards in the NBA. What are your immediate thoughts on this trade?
Immediate thought. Okay, also a trade pick was included. I think a 2021 or 22 second round draft pick. I don't know if that'll end up being important or relevant or not. I think this is the blockbuster trade of the year, probably. I don't expect that we're going to see anything bigger than this, and it's interesting that he ultimately lands in Philadelphia. I think it wasn't so expected. We were leaning towards Miami or maybe Brooklyn.
Houston.
Nothing seemed to be falling through. Houston, nothing seemed to really be falling through. We had the podcast, maybe he would come to the Raptors with a trade, but this is a good team for him where the situation is good for both sides, I think. Minnesota improves, and Jimmy Butler, he gets the opportunity to be paid next season. He gets the opportunity to be on a potentially winning team by a much better coach. I think it's really interesting because we're going to see a completely different landscape now. We're adding more depth to the Eastern Conference.
Most definitely. Jimmy Butler, in my opinion, is if you don't include James Harden as a shooting guard, he's a top 3 shooting guard in the NBA along with DeMar DeRozan and Klay Thompson. That might be able to be debated, but Jimmy Butler is a legit 3-and-D player. He can score at will. He's a complete dog on the court. I really love his game. I respect his game, and the fact that he's coming to the Eastern Conference now to a team that's already loaded, with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and a few other players there. Hopefully Markelle Fultz can turn it around. But Jimmy Butler in that situation, I think that puts their ceiling at a whole nother level. I know they have a couple holes now to fill with Dario Saric and Covington, who are 2 solid role players in the NBA. They're getting brought out of the lineup, but the fact that just the intensity and the star power that Jimmy Butler's going to bring to that roster, it might give them a little hit in the regular season, but they've been a good regular season for the past couple of years now. They're at the top part of the conference in the East right now. Last year they were the 3rd seed. So they're working at the playoffs. And in the playoffs, you want as much star power as possible. We see it. That's why the Raptors traded DeMar for Kawhi Leonard despite being the 1st seed last year. They have a few guys injured. I think this puts the Sixers at a much better chance at competing with the Toronto Raptors and the Celtics in the Eastern Conference now this year.
Yeah, okay, and this is where our opinions diverge. I disagree. I think that this is a fun, fantastic move to have an entertaining season, this current season for the Philadelphia 76ers. I think that they're the 4th best team prior to this trade in the Eastern Conference, and they're going to remain at best the 4th best team in the Eastern Conference this season. And I think because there's no argument that Jimmy Butler is all the things that you've touted him to be. If we look at his stats from the prior seasons and even in the couple games that he played this season for a team he didn't have any desire to be on, he hated the situation, he hated the coach, and he still puts up those numbers. It's fantastic. But the hit that they are taking cannot be understated to the bench because they have a team that's riddled with injuries. You have T.J. McConnell just coming back off of injury, Wilson Chandler coming off of injury, Zaire Smith, who has no timetable for when he's coming back, Mike Muscala, who sat last game, Jared Bayless, who we're unsure when he's going to come back as well. So essentially what's going to have to happen is you're taking 2 starters out of the lineup. You're going to have to shift a guy like Amir Johnson into the starting, or maybe Wilson Chandler. And now all your bench is left to is J.J. Redick, an unhealthy TJ, of course, during playoff time, they won't be unhealthy, we can expect, and a bunch of no-names, really. So I think what's going to happen is they're going to have to prove somehow to Jimmy Butler that this is the team that he's going to want to stay and play on. They're going to try not to lose him to the Clippers or to Brooklyn in the offseason. They're going to give him the money that he wants, and then they got to put something else on the bench, because I don't think it's possible to ride these guys 40 minutes per game throughout the entire season and then expect them to perform well in the playoffs. If you look at the Raptors, how are they better? Ben Simmons is going to be a good player, but I think his performance as of late, he's not even the second best player on the team behind Joel Embiid. That's JJ Redick's been playing like the second best player on the team. You still have the uncertainty of Markelle Fultz, and you still have the uncertainty of actually Joel Embiid is pretty much a lock. He is absolutely beasting this season. But you have all these guys that just haven't come together yet, right? And it's shown in the start of their performance this season. Of course they can bring themselves together, and this is really positive that the trade happened so early because Jimmy Butler will have time to develop the chemistry before playoffs.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at it, the matchups against the Raptors and the Bucks is not even a contest in this playoffs. And this is not my bias. This is just if you're looking at bench performance and if you're looking at the superstars, there's no way that the 76ers could compete with either of those top teams. And then I'm uncertain if they would even defeat the Boston Celtics. I think we can be much more pragmatic or much more reasonable this season to assume that this is a team that has tremendous potential for next season, right? If they can develop a better bench around these three superstars, perhaps four superstars with Markelle Fultz, but he's a really huge question mark.
Okay. No, I see where you're coming from, but and obviously I'm not saying the Sixers are better than the Raptors or the Bucks or the Celtics necessarily right now. I'm saying it puts them in a better position to compete against those teams. I'd still put the Raptors at the top, and I think this could, in my opinion, I think the Sixers are the second best team in the East. That's obviously debatable, but I think the Raptors are the clear number ones. But you mentioned the bench, right? They have a lot of injuries right now, and that's the biggest problem with this team. And that's not, but they're not worried about winning games in November, December. That's not the Sixers' issue right now. They're worried about being good for the playoffs. And obviously, if injuries happen, whether they didn't make the trade or they did make the trade, that would still cripple this team. But you mentioned it. TJ McConnell and Wilson Chandler are coming back from injury right now, and those are two very solid NBA players. Wilson Chandler is a starter in the NBA. At least he was before he was injured. I'm sure he'll get back to at least 80%, 90% form. TJ McConnell has shown that he's one of the top-tier backup point guards in the NBA. He can still play at a high level. And now Markelle Fultz is going to be brought to the bench, and he's going to be given an opportunity to be the lead scorer. He's going to be, because Markelle Fultz is a guy that in college was built to be a scoring machine, really. He's athletic, he can dunk, he's not necessarily, his shooting has been talked about so much, but this year he's been hitting the mid-range jumpers. The three is still super inconsistent. And Zaire Smith, his injury's been a bit freaky with his foot, and then the peanut allergy that came out about him. That's a freaky story if you guys want to read that. Mike Muscala is a legitimate NBA player. I think they have serviceable enough bench. They're not strong enough to compete with the Raptors or something, but they have a serviceable enough bench. And now that they have more star power in the starting unit, a starting unit with Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butler, JJ Redick, and whoever you want to throw at the four, and Joel Embiid, that's a very powerful, very talented starting unit. And that's what you need in the playoffs.
No,
the best guys on the court.
You need a starting lineup, but the thing is, you also need positive pieces around this. You're taking out Dario Saric, who was a very good three-point shooter for the 76ers, and Robert Covington, who last season and on a good night this season is also one of their better three-point shooters. And you're replacing him with Jimmy Butler, who's at times been good from three-point and at times has been inconsistent. And then you're putting nothing else. So now you have left Amir Johnson, you have left Wilson Chandler, TJ McConnell, Mike Muscala. None of these guys have that consistency that you've lost in terms of the players that you traded away. And I think that really they're going to be hindered on. You have Markelle Fultz, who's a liability from shooting still because his form is so wacky. Ben Simmons, who can't shoot, right? I just don't see how the pieces are going to, this season, make the team any better. I don't think that they improve radically. I think that perhaps they'll win more games now with Jimmy Butler than they would have won prior, but I think that they are far away from having the pieces to contend legitimately with any team in the playoffs.
Okay, so I see where you're coming from, but I still put star power. You always trade two 50-cent pieces for $1, and people step up. I think that's the strategy you make as an NBA GM if you want to have a top-tier team, especially for playoff situations. As you've argued multiple times this year about how you want to see, maybe not during early regular season, but as we inch closer to the playoffs, you want to see the Raptors lineup kind of shrink down and have our best players on the court at all times. And the Sixers don't have near the depth or anything that we have, but they have a really solid top 7-8 players that can, really perform. My one fear would be that, with this argument is that Joel Embiid might have too much of a load, and we know that he has an injury history. Same with Ben Simmons. So as long as they stay healthy, relatively, a couple, maybe one or two, the bench guys can go out because, they're not so talented that they're not interchangeable. But as long as the main top 3 guys stay healthy, I'm saying this is the second best team in the Eastern Conference.
I think they're going to have to play a tight 8-man rotation, and I agree. I have said that this is what the Raptors need for the playoffs, but they're going to have to play that rotation and hope to God that no other player gets injured, because if it goes down, it will cripple them.
Yep.
And if they're going to be relying on an 8-man rotation, that means they're going to need to expect heavy minutes from their starters, which is going to wear them down before the playoff time comes. So they're going to need to play a really intricate chess match of rotation piece, of how to adjust the rotation to stay in the playoff race and in the, to get a favorable seed when come playoff time and not have your players completely burned out from exhaustion.
Yeah, that's 100% fair. That's my one fair on this, but assuming health, because, we can't predict injuries, I think it's a risky move in that sense, but it definitely ups their ceiling as much. Because I think both of us agree they didn't have a chance to come out of the Eastern Conference before they made this move, and I think their chances increased after making this deal if all things fall right. But this is a Raptors podcast, and how do you think they match up against the Toronto Raptors if we played in a 7-game series?
In a 7-game series, it's a fantastic question. It's a tough matchup, I think, because obviously Joel Embiid is hard to contain, right? And we don't have that sort of defensive prowess really fantastically to defend him, because our best defensive players are all much too small to guard him. So we're relying on Ibaka, who's still undersized, and then JV, who, he's had some good games against Embiid, but that's the tough matchup. Of course, then you can put anybody you want really on Ben Simmons, Siakam, Leonard, or Danny Green or OG, and then you still have any of the 3 players that you don't put on him to guard Jimmy Butler. Markelle Fultz with inconsistencies and is just starting to understand how to be a good NBA player. I think he's not the biggest concern. JJ Redick would be huge. JJ Redick is like Tim Hardaway Jr. in the game we just played against the Knicks. It's a guy that is really just lives out on the 3-point line. The Raptors couldn't seem quite understanding how to contain him off the pick and roll situation that just kept allowing him to get those open shots. So I think it would be an interesting series, but I think it would be easily the Raptors in 5 or the Raptors in 6. I think, like I said, this season, because of their lack of depth, you can constantly attack their star players, right? You can put Kawhi Leonard on Jimmy Butler and tire him the whole game. Then when Kawhi Leonard, maybe Ben Simmons starts to pick it up, so you can switch Kawhi over to Ben Simmons, and you have Siakam that you can put on to Jimmy Butler. You have Danny Green you can put on to Jimmy Butler. You can just wear these guys down because the Raptors have so much more depth, and I think it'll make a much more interesting Eastern Conference to watch in the regular season, to watch in the playoffs, but I think ultimately it's only this season, it's only a lateral move for the 76ers. It's not making them incredibly better.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I still think it puts their ceiling higher. I think my only worry about this team, about improvement, is injuries and being burnt out. But assuming health, I think they're at a much stronger place than they were yesterday to compete with us, especially the fact Jimmy Butler is a Raptor killer. We never, this is a different Raptors team, as obviously DeMar DeRozan would be the main guy guarding Jimmy Butler in the past, and that's not the case anymore. But nonetheless, he's still a guy that can put big numbers on the board, especially in the city of Toronto. But the team doesn't have, we have the star power to match them, and our depth and our ability to just create. And you mentioned it, the defensive versatility for the Toronto Raptors, especially in the playoffs when we can game plan and really lock in on guys like Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. We saw what Kawhi Leonard did to Ben Simmons in the first matchup this season against the Sixers, and completely had him shook, had about 11 turnovers, it felt like, from Ben Simmons. So I think we're still in a really good place to beat the Sixers, but I think their ceiling is much higher. That's my opinion. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes this year. I think this might put them ahead of the Celtics and the Bucks right now. I'd pick them. It's good just because of how their frontline star potential. But this Eastern Conference, it's getting better at the top at least.
Yeah, it's definitely getting more exciting. And I want to say one more thing about the matchup between the 76ers and the Raptors, or just any team in general. You're right about Jimmy Butler being a Raptor killer, but I think now on this current team, the shooting guard is the least valuable opponent to the Raptors because you have a fantastic defensive player in Danny Green, whose only role is to play defense and shoot threes, whereas we give a lot of criticism towards DeMar for not always stepping up to his defensive matchups, but we also lean on him to have 30 points per game, or else the Raptors weren't going to win. So now you have a player that can be entirely committed to defense and nothing else. You don't expect any other thing on offense from him.
Yeah.
So So I don't think that Jimmy Butler would be half. Well, okay, that's unfair to say from a superstar, but I mean I don't think he'd be 75% as dangerous because the player that you have matched up against him doesn't have to really also put in a lot of effort onto the offensive end. So you're opening it up to just allow your superstar players, your Kawhi and your Kyle Lowry, because Kyle Lowry doesn't have to guard anybody. He only has to guard Markelle Fultz, right? So these guys can score all day.
Yeah, no, most definitely. It's definitely going to make the Eastern Conference super interesting. As you guys hearing, you can argue this both ways, back and forth forever, we just got to play out the season and see what's going to happen. My prediction is a Raptors-Sixers Eastern Conference Finals right now. That might change. It might come back to bite me. What's your prediction for the Eastern Conference Finals?
Finals, Bucks and Raptors.
Bucks-Raptors? Okay, you heard it here first. The Celtics are getting the boot, according to the Raptors Digest. Let us know who you think is going to make the Eastern Conference Finals in the comment section below. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. You know, the Sixers were falling out of the conversation, but it's getting exciting again. There's really 4 horses going really hard to get to the finals this year with LeBron gone. So, yeah, thanks for the support, listening this far. Any last words, Ryker?
The East is finally not a joke. It's fantastic.
At least at the top.
True. All right, cheers.